Hello there, and thanks for watching. Last week I watched a video of the great British philosopher Alex O'Connor and the American theoretical physicist Sean Carroll, and they were discussing the so-called fine-tuning argument for God. At least, that is how it's generally known among both theists and atheists. Many Christian apologists state that the so-called fine-tuning argument is one of their best arguments for the existence of their God. But even some of the greatest atheist thinkers of the modern era, like the late Christopher Hitchens, stated that the supposed fine-tuning argument, although very problematic in many ways, was the most intriguing argument theists have, and worthy of spending time thinking about. Richard Dawkins made similar remarks and said that although it was a very bad argument, it is the best argument they have. In their video, Alex O'Connor and Sean Carroll elaborate on why the so-called fine-tuning argument is such a terrible argument. So far, so good, you'd think, because actual great thinkers, such as Hitchens, Dawkins, O'Connor and Carroll, label the so-called fine-tuning argument as a very bad argument. Yet, just like Hitchens and Dawkins, O'Connor and Carroll recognize the so-called fine-tuning argument as an argument in the first place, and that is what the problem is. I've never understood why even great thinkers consider this supposed fine-tuning thing to be an argument for anything, because it isn't. The supposed fine-tuning argument is not an argument at all. In reality, it's a circular fallacy disguised as an argument. It doesn't prove anything about a God, and it doesn't make the existence of any God more likely in any way. But it's even worse. The whole principle of the so-called fine-tuning argument is based upon first feeding it its own conclusion that a God exists, so that in the next step we can say that there must be a God. Although I greatly appreciate Hitchens, Dawkins, O'Connor and Carroll highlighting the many flaws and problems of the so-called fine-tuning argument, which I totally agree with, I think we should no longer recognize it as an argument and just call it for what it is: the fine-tuning fallacy. It's not an argument, it is a circular fallacy. In this video, I am going to explain why this so-called fine-tuning argument in reality is a circular fallacy, so that you will never have to recognize fine-tuning as an argument again. Now, the fine-tuning fallacy is pretty deceptive, but once you see its major flaw that disqualifies it as an argument, you cannot unsee it. Let's first listen to Alex and Sean so that we can pinpoint the exact problem. Oh, and today's video might get a bit long-winded, but please stick with me and hear me out till the end, because it's important that we fully expose and tear down this ridiculous fine-tuning nonsense.
I know you know about the fine-tuning argument for the existence of God, and I don't want to just do the boring thing of just asking you exactly what you think about that, but specifically, when people talk about this, the problem that we're confronted with is that the universe abides by a certain number of constants which seem very finely balanced, to the degree that if you were to increase gravity or its strength by the most unfathomably tiny amount, the universe would all collapse in on itself, and the reverse is true as well. And so we're kind of typically given three options here to explain why it is that the universe is finely balanced to allow atoms to form and planets and stars and stuff. One is it's just by chance, which seems incredibly unlikely. One is that God did it, which seems maybe a bit too easy. And the third is necessity, that there's some kind of reason why it had to be that way. Or maybe not a reason why it had to be that way, but it just had to be that way.
Now, my apologies for cutting the clip even before Sean Carroll will start his explanation. Although I, of course, greatly appreciate and support his ideas, the whole problem lies in this short explanation that Alex just gave. It never hurts to rephrase the so-called fine-tuning problem in a nutshell. Everyone who knows the principle will explain it in their own way, but I think the so-called fine-tuning argument goes like this. The universe is ruled by the laws of nature that result in a certain set of physical constants, like the gravitational constant, the speed of light, the Planck constant, etc. In the current universe, all these constants have very specific values. We can imagine trillions upon trillions of specific combinations of values of these physical constants. But the vast majority of these combinations would lead to a universe that would not permit life as we know it. The chances of the physical constants ending up with these exact life-permitting values are a 1 in trillions. Yet here we are. The current values of these physical constants are such that we have a life-permitting universe. These chances were astronomically small, yet it happened. So, when it comes to chance and probability, something remarkable is going on here that deserves an explanation. So, what is that explanation? It just happened by chance, which was a 1 in trillions. So that's highly unlikely. So there must have been a god who designed the universe so that it would permit life. That is about the gist of the so-called fine-tuning argument. And even as I explain it to you, I almost appreciate the beauty of its deceptiveness. I can understand why this narrative fools so many people into believing that this is an argument instead of a circular fallacy. Now let's focus on the exact moment that I think Alex shows that he too is deceived by the circular character of this supposed argument.
And so we're kind of typically given 3 options here to explain why it is that the universe is finely balanced to allow atoms to form and planets and stars and stuff. One is it's just by chance, which seems incredibly unlikely.
Now, this is where it looks as if Alex is going along with a rather problematic assumption of the so-called fine-tuning argument, which is the idea that something very special is going on with the physical constants of the universe that is so unlikely that it needs an explanation. Yet, that's totally not the case. Nothing special is going on with these physical constants. The outcome of the physical constants of the current universe is exactly on cue. It is exactly what we would expect based upon chance. At least, that is the consequence of the argument itself. Because the whole point of the argument is there could have been a huge number of combinations of values of these physical constants. To keep it simple, let's say it's 1 trillion combinations. I know the argument proposes 1 trillion times 1 trillion times 1 trillion and so on, but for the sake of this explanation, let's just call it 1 trillion possible outcomes of combinations of physical constants of the universe. All of these 1 trillion individual outcomes had the exact same probability. At least, the argument does not propose some kind of specific probability distribution over different outcomes. It just proposes that there could have been 1 trillion different outcomes of combinations of physical constants. So all of these trillion outcomes had a chance of 1 in 1 trillion to come to fruition. And the current set of physical constants is just one of those possible outcomes. All of those outcomes had a 1 in 1 trillion chance of becoming reality. The current outcome had the exact same probability as any other outcome. But the combined chance that one of those trillion outcomes would come to fruition was 100%. And that is exactly what happened. One of those trillion outcomes of physical constants came to fruition. That is exactly according to chance and doesn't need any specific explanation. In a universe where the existence of a god is not proven or assumed, the existence of life-permitting physical constants has no significant meaning for that universe itself. A universe without a god would do just fine with or without life. Stars and galaxies don't care about the existence of puppies, babies, and little rabbits. It's just one of the possible trillion outcomes. It doesn't have any specific status that requires an explanation. If we do not assume the existence of a god, a universe that permits life is not more unique than a universe where all rocks have purple spots, where space is filled with glowing sand grains, or where space, time, and matter would collapse in 1 trillion different ways. It doesn't matter. Every single combination of physical constants has the same random status and the same probability to come to fruition. The only reason why the current life-permitting set of physical constants would call for a specific explanation is if we presuppose the existence of a creator of the universe who had the objective to permit life. Only in that case, if we presuppose the existence of a god whose aim it was to create life, the actual occurrence of life happening by chance indeed starts to look rather odd. And in that case, a little help from that God seems to be a much more likely scenario. But in that case, we are presupposing the existence of a God to fix an argument that was meant to prove the existence of that God. In other words, the only way to make the so-called fine-tuning argument work is to presuppose its own conclusion that a God exists. Only then we can come to the conclusion that a God exists. So the so-called fine-tuning argument is circular by nature. It's not an argument. It's a circular fallacy. And many people don't seem to notice that. Now, knowing what we know now, let's listen to that same clip of Alex one more time. By the way, if you're still here and if you appreciate my work, then please consider to support the channel by becoming a member. You can do that by clicking the join button. Your support is greatly appreciated and it helps me to continue to make these videos. Thanks in advance. Now, let's continue the video.
And so we're kind of typically given three options here to explain why it is that the universe is finely balanced to allow atoms to form and planets and stars and stuff. One is it's just by chance, which seems incredibly unlikely. One is that God did it, which seems maybe a bit too easy. And the third is necessity, that there's some kind of reason why it had to be that way. Or maybe not a reason why it had to be that way, but it just had to be that way.
Yeah, to me it still looks as if Alex is fooled by the deceptiveness of this argument. The argument pretends as if there is something special or highly unlikely going on that needs an explanation, while that's absolutely not the case. And I know it can be very hard to see this. It's kind of like these visual deception paintings, and you can see an old lady in it, but at the same time you can see a young woman in it, depending on your perspective. And sometimes some people can only see the old lady or the young woman. Yet the funny thing is, once you see both, this cannot be unseen. And it's kind of the same with the deceptiveness of the fine-tuning fallacy. Maybe it helps if I clarify this with some analogies. Again, the whole problem with the fine-tuning fallacy is that it pretends that there is a problem that we need to explain, while in reality that problem does not exist. Okay, so now let's use that principle to prove fraud in the lottery. Without any evidence for fraud, all I have is a lottery and a winner. One day, Miss Smith from Birmingham wins the lottery, and your neighbor says, "How do you explain that? Did it just happen by chance? That seems very unlikely." And you think, well, that's an odd question. The lottery exists, people play lotteries, and someone has to win them. Miss Smith from Birmingham winning the lottery is just one of the million possible outcomes. And she or anyone else winning the lottery is exactly what we would expect based upon chance. So there is nothing additionally to explain here regarding chance, because in this case chance itself offers an adequate explanation for Miss Smith from Birmingham winning the lottery. Except when we presuppose the existence of a fraudulent con man working at the lottery office who has the aim of making Miss Smith from Birmingham win the lottery. If we were to presuppose the existence of this fraudulent con man at the lottery office, Miss Smith from Birmingham winning the lottery by chance all of a sudden seems very unlikely. And if chance is not a good explanation, then a fraudulent con man at the lottery office, whose existence we just presupposed, seems to be a much more interesting option. Wow, I hope you noticed what I just did here. I just made the existence of fraud a good explanation by suggesting that chance was not a good explanation, which is only the case if we presuppose the existence of fraud. That was a circular fallacy. I just made the existence of fraud more likely by presupposing the existence of fraud. Now, the fine-tuning fallacy works exactly the same. All we have to do is replace the lottery with the universe, Miss Smith from Birmingham with the physical constants of the universe, and the fraudulent con man with God. And then we get this. One day there is a universe with physical constants that permit life. And your neighbor comes to you and says, "How do you explain that? Did it just happen by chance? That seems very unlikely." And you think, well, that's an odd question. physical constants exist, and they could adapt any combination of possible values, and this combination of physical constants that permit life was just one of those trillion possible outcomes. And one of those outcomes coming to fruition is exactly what you would expect, based upon chance. Except when you presuppose the existence of a God who had the purpose of creating life. Because only if we presuppose the existence of a God, those life-permitting conditions in the universe happening by chance suddenly seems pretty unlikely. Because if we presuppose the existence of a God, there must be a plan behind these life-permitting conditions, rather than just random chance. You see how rejection of the idea that these life-permitting physical constants just happened by chance, which is exactly what Alex does, only makes sense if we presuppose the existence of a God. Because if we do not presuppose the existence of a God, life-permitting physical constants in the universe happening by chance is no problem anymore, because then the occurrence of these life-permitting physical constants is just one of the trillion outcomes that had the exact same probability as any other outcome. And that nullifies the entire idea of fine-tuning, because now there is nothing remarkable going on that needs an explanation. Unfortunately, I cannot get rid of the impression that Alex is fooled by this silly fallacy. And if that is the case, he might be unwillingly providing credit to this fine-tuning nonsense that it doesn't deserve in any way. By rejecting the idea that life-permitting physical constants are unlikely to be happening by chance, you presuppose the existence of a God in an argument that was supposed to prove the existence of a God. That is a circular fallacy. Alex, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm basically telling you that I think that you, like so many others, you're also being fooled by the clever deceptiveness of this circular fallacy. Of course, I would very much like to hear from you if you agree with this assessment. Now, there are some ways for theists who value their fine-tuning fallacy to respond to my video. I thought over many of those possible responses and I think none of them makes any sense. When I dropped a similar plea in an earlier video, I found some confident theists in my comment section who said, well, you can't say that a universe permitting life is just one of the trillion outcomes like any other outcome, because all the other outcomes would not even permit the entire universe to exist in the first place. The current physical constants are the only possibility out of trillions of possibilities to have a physical universe in the first place, which was a totally self-defeating line of reasoning, because if all the other trillions of options would lead to a situation in which the unborn universe would collapse on itself all the time, that would mean that any physical universe that would ever exist would automatically permit life. So then we don't need chance and don't need a God to explain life. It's just a necessity. It would also mean that as long as the physical constants of the universe do not have a very, very, very specific set of values, a physical universe doesn't really come into existence. It keeps collapsing on itself because the physical constants do not yet have the proper values that are needed to start an expansion and create matter, time and space. And as soon as if these proper values are there, a physical universe indeed comes into existence just by natural means. That hypothesis is consistent with the assumptions as proposed by the fine-tuning fallacy. Yes, because it is proponents of the fine-tuning fallacy themselves who suggest that the physical constants could have had a trillion different values. So without really knowing it, I suppose, the fine-tuning fallacy basically provides a hypothesis for a universe coming into existence in a natural way, being physical constants that can assume trillions of different values, and each new random set of values makes the unborn universe collapse on itself, trillions upon trillions upon trillions of times in a row, until that specific moment where, exactly according to chance, at some point the physical constants have the exact values that are needed for a physical universe to come into existence. So bravo! you just provided a framework for a natural universe that does not need any God. Anyway, that was it for now. I hope my extensive explanation and examples have made it clear that the fine-tuning argument does not exist. All we have is a fine-tuning fallacy that presupposes the existence of a God so that it can prove the existence of a God. Well, that was it for today. Thanks for watching.